Thank you, Chairman Craven, Vice Chairman Stanley, is that on? Shanley, I'm sorry. Shanley, members of the committee, and especially my sister Carol McEntee, for giving me this opportunity to testify in favor of Bill 5171. I've testified many times to increase the statute of limitations for child sexual abuse in both Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Last year, I told this committee about the lasting effects of abuse and the way its tentacles permeate a survivor's life and family, and how the shame prevents us from speaking up or even remembering for decades. I've submitted that testimony again in writing to you, but tonight I'm going to talk about my own story. I'm a wife, mother, sister, psychologist, artist, advocate, and survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I'm not really very different from most of you, which feels very comfortable to me. As you look at me and see me as a reasonably articulate adult, it may be hard to understand why I'm here tonight. I really don't want you to see me as a victim. Truth is, I left victimhood behind about 20 years ago. But I'm not here to fight for me, but to help you see that the statute of limitations needs to change so that justice can be served. And with justice being served, other children will be protected. The best way to do that is to make us both uncomfortable as I tell you my truth. We survivors have so many uncomfortable stories, and we usually save ourselves and you the pain by using generalities such as child abuse or molestation. And then we leave it at that. Tonight it's time to rip the scab off my own pain and the blindfolds off your eyes, because only really knowing will convince you that the Rhode Island laws need to change to protect children, so things don't happen that happened to me. I'm the oldest of 4 children in what was a very Catholic family, as Carol said. At 5 years old, my parents sent me to kindergarten at Sacred Heart School. This is what I looked like in kindergarten. I was brave that first day, still trusting. I'm not sure how soon it started, but early in kindergarten, when Father DeAngelis began taking me out of class to visit the rectory. He was a good friend of my grandfather's, so it must have seemed natural. I remember being in a big chair in his parlor with my feet not touching the ground, waiting to go upstairs. 5 is still pretty young. Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny were still very real to me. Father D, as we called him, performed miracles at Mass. He changed the host into Jesus. He was very close to God, and I was sure of it. My memories aren't like movies, with every detail complete. They're more like snapshots and vignettes. I didn't even recover them in chronological order. I learned to disassociate, to emotionally check out very early. I finally did this so successfully that my memories didn't come back until I was 40, when my own children were about the same age when it started to happen to me. Excuse me. My mouth gets dry when I'm nervous. The first memory that came to me was almost as a mantra. I don't have to feel it. I don't have to feel anything. I don't have to feel Monsignor's cross. I'm lying on a desk, face down. I can feel my naked skin sticking to the wood and see the pattern of the wallpaper and the yellowed window shades pulled down. He's in a priest's robe, raping me with a crucifix. I don't have to feel it. I don't have to feel it. I don't have to feel it. I'm not sure how old I am in that memory. I think around 2nd grade, but it happened many times. Early in that first year of school, I remember dreading the creak of the school bus as it stopped in front of the house. I didn't want to go. The bus driver came into the house to get me because I wouldn't go willingly. My family just thought I was being a baby and wanted to stay home with my mother. I cried all the way to school for weeks. Finally, I stopped crying on the bus. Mostly, I stopped crying for decades. I remember looking out the window. I'll just give you a number of memories that I do have. Like I said, they're vignettes. I remember looking out the window on the landing of the stairs going up to his office and seeing Lamb Motors, the car dealer next door, from a perspective that I couldn't see any other way. I remember the fear and anxiety as I walked up the stairs, knowing and not knowing what would come next. I remember sitting on his lap in my slip, my uniform on the floor, and he smoothing my hair, calling me Bella Anna. This memory could be the true definition of mixed emotions. I remember another time panicked because I couldn't find my underwear and I had to go back to school. My dissociation by that time was so refined that the only focus was on my underpants, not the horror that I had just endured. I remember the gross look of his genitals close up to my face. I remember choking and gagging during oral sex. This memory came as I woke up, unable to breathe, gasping for air, with no physical reason for that condition. I remember my arm hurting from the repetitive movement of manually bringing him to climax. This came first as a physical sensation. I remember the sound of the rosary beads as one of the sisters brought me over to the church to meet him. Anxiety rushing through my body on high alert to the danger. I remember the secret passage behind the altar that only the priest and the altar boys were supposed to know about. I remember his house in Scarborough that nobody else in my family ever went to and never even knew where it was. And I remember letting the horror go as I walked back to class, counting the blocks on the sidewalk hypnotically. I remember stomach aches and insisting to the nuns that I had to go home before school was out. My mom would miraculously come and get me. I even remember having accidents in school long past the age I should and being totally mortified. So I tried my hardest to be as good as possible. I tried to overcome the guilt of being Monsignor's favorite. My heart would sink every time I was chosen to be the Virgin Mary to crown the statue of, to be the person to crown the Virgin Mary statue in May, or chosen as an angel for the communion classes. I actually represented the school at the cathedral in Providence when he was made a Monsignor and had to hand him an award from the school during a celebration for him. As an adult, before I remembered the abuse, I lived with the horrible feeling that if you opened me up, my insides would either be completely empty or black and rotten. It wasn't a rational thought, but just a feeling. I didn't cry for years. I lived on very little sleep and endured my nightmares, and still do. So fast forward 30 years, past the time the torture stopped when I was 12. I went to the Diocese Office of Education and Compliance with my dear sister Carol and met with Lieutenant Robert McCarthy asking for help with my therapy. That began a 3-year battle for validation. The decade following my memories returning, in 1992, I lived a double life. Internally, I was distraught, sometimes suicidal, anxious, haunted by memories, and close to anorexic. Externally, I mothered 3 young children, maintained a private psychotherapy practice, entertained friends, and even began to paint. In 2002, I went public with the abuse, and my life was changed forever. My husband and I became outspoken in the movement to oust Cardinal Law, and I became a SNAP leader for many years, the New England coordinator of SNAP, the Survivors Network of those abused by priests. My psychology practice became focused on adult child abuse survivors. People began finding me. They had read about me in the paper, and they knew I'd get it. This last 26 years, since I remembered, could have been a time of reconciliation with the church I was taught to love as a child. Therapy 3 times a week for years and a loving, supportive family helped me overcome the abuse by Monsignor DeAngelis. But no reconciliation was possible. Over and over, the Catholic Church fought me, disappointed me, and proved themselves to never, ever have the interests of children's welfare or the healing of abuse survivors as their first interest. The latest example was Father Healy's lobbying behind the scenes against the bill last year. Every time I hoped they would do the moral right thing over the last 25 years, I was deeply disappointed. So the dissolution of my faith was a death by 1,000 cuts, long and painful. But like when you finally stop believing in Santa Claus, you can't ever get it back. I don't trust them. Today, as I talk to you, I'm worried about what the behind-the-scenes power they might wield to undermine this legislation. And I ask all of you to remember that no one has elected Father Healy or Bishop Tobin to this governing body. I do trust that you'll all do the right thing and pass this bill, which will ultimately protect all our children and our grandchildren. When you do, you will be telling predators and their protectors that they can no longer hide behind antiquated laws. Thank you.
Thank you.